What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Morello Show, episode number 14. Of course, I'm your host, Kyle Morello. A little change of scenery today. Figured I'd change it up a little bit. Welcome. This is my basement door. We're in my kitchen. So something new today. New guest with me today. Obviously, we had returned guest last week, our first one, but today we've got Locked On Phillies host, WIP producer in Philadelphia, and a very good friend of mine, Dan Wilson. How we doing?
Kyle, going well. Episode 14, happy to be here. Little surprised to hear that they're returning guests before I made my debut, but I'll let that one slide. But
we had an emergency situation.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure there was. Yeah, I'm sure there was. But I'm happy to be here, Kyle, for real.
Thank you, Buzz. Dan, I really appreciate that. I knew it was going to be a slip up at some point with me calling you by your nickname.
We could just get this out in the open. I mean, pretty much everyone knows. My stage name is Buzz. My professional name, if you will, is Dan. You can use the two interchangeably. It's not a big deal.
Yes. So I will probably end up switching between the two of them during this because we're being a little professional, but a little unprofessional. So it's okay. But I have you on this week. Obviously, we're going to talk about some baseball. My team, the New York Mets, your team, the Philadelphia Phillies just played a 4-game series this past weekend, and either team could have swept, but we split. So I guess, Buzz, your biggest takeaway from the series so far?
My biggest takeaway is this is as microcosm as it gets for the Phillies season. Poor defense, poor bullpen outings. The Phillies starting pitching was very, very good in this series. They should have, literally had the opportunity to win each and every one of these games. I was at the doubleheader on Friday. They definitely should have won game one. Shout out to Aaron Nola getting 10 strikeouts in a row, tying Tom Seaver's record in Queens. But then they lose the game anyway, 2-1. They come back and win 2-1 during the Matt Moore start. On Saturday, you actually score 2 runs off of Jacob deGrom, which is like, him, this is the equivalent of him blowing up. And you still lose the game because you can't field the ball. And then Rhys Hoskins has the audacity, like the absolute audacity, to say right about the good things too when you're 6 games out of first place and things are going poorly. Like how out of touch you have to be to say something like that is just unreal. And they draw a split, and because of poor defense, poor bullpen outings, which has been the name of the game for the Phillies all year, they don't make up any ground on the Mets. They only have 6 games remaining with them all season. If you're the Mets, you can say, yeah, there were some games maybe we could have capitalized on more, but I'm much more satisfied. You're still sitting in first place. The Phillies didn't make up any ground on you. For the Phillies, this is a much worse scenario, and why I don't believe this team looks like a playoff team, because when it actually counts, they just fork games away left and right among the league leaders and blown saves and blown leads and things like that. It's just been a really frustrating year for the Phillies, not just because the amount of games they're losing, but the way in which they're losing these games feels like a carryover from 2020.
And you mentioned like it's a microcosm of the season so far, and like you just mentioned, a carryover 2020. And for me as a Mets fan, like obviously I've only really seen the games that you play us, or on Twitter, or our friends are talking about it or whatnot.
I promise you, you're not like what you saw.
No, I'm not missing much.
Is what you're seeing like night in and night out. It's not a Mets specific thing,
Oh, correct. But you're talking about all the blown leads. I'm pretty sure since 2020. They have by far the most blown ninth inning leads in baseball.
They're the worst bullpen in 90 years. 90 years in Major League Baseball.
Well, I was just going to ask you,
historical.
Is it the bullpen? Is it the defense that's one of the worst in defensive run saves, at least in the National League, if not the entire league? Because your offense hasn't been terrible. Is it which one of those is the worst thing?
Well, the offense isn't as good as it was last year. It was one of the best offenses in terms of runs scored, tied for top 5 last year, and they missed the playoffs in an expanded year because the bullpen had an ERA over 7. So let's start there. This year, the offense hasn't been as good, but they've been hitting more in the month of June as we actually see offense go up a little bit since they're cracking down on foreign substances and we get into the summer months.
Which we'll get into.
I know we'll get into. But in terms of this, literally might be the worst defensive team I've ever seen. And that's not just the Phillies, or not just because I'm young. As you mentioned, I'll give myself a little shout out here. I also work at WIP, had a chance to pick some of the older host brains on this as well, who've been watching baseball much longer than I've even been alive, and they can't remember defense this bad. So the other night, for instance, we're at the doubleheader, and they have an issue. The Phillies have an issue of figuring out who's the closer on the roster. And I don't believe they have a closer on this roster. I actually think like Hector Neris has been a wild roller coaster. He was really shaky. Then he got really good for a month, and now he's really shaky again. But then the other day they said we're going to go away from Hector Neris. We're going to go to Alvarado as the closer instead, and they go to him. And a ball's hit the third base that easily should be fielded by Alec Boehm, and he's one of the worst defensive third basemen I've literally ever seen. Like, he can't play a major league third base, and that leads to the Mets winning. And then on Saturday, you have Rhys Hoskins letting a ball go right through his legs to allow ultimately a Mets inning. Now, Neris still walked a couple guys after that, so I'm not freeing the bullpen of blame here. But when you have guys that can't field their position, I mean, you're literally just giving away outs on a consistent basis. It looks like little league defense. And the worst thing is that that's not even the worst mistake Hoskins has made against the Mets specifically this year. If you remember on Sunday Night Baseball, he didn't get the ball in. He allowed Jonathan Villar, I think it was, to just score. Like, it's just a joke. Like, you get 27 outs in a baseball game, and it feels like they're given 32. And you just can't win games like that. So they have deserved every bit of their lackluster record. And for a team that was supposed to be contending by year 3 of the Bryce Harper contract, this is why you bring back JT Realmuto on the highest catcher's contract ever. It's just wildly disappointing, and they're stuck because it's not as if, hey, this team's on the horizon getting better. They got things coming up through the minor leagues. Like, this is the team, and it's constructed in a very lackluster way, and they have major deficiencies that plague them time in and time out. And it's why you can't even buy into their hot start in the month of June, because this is right around the corner, which is a blessing and a curse of the long baseball season. But you can't fake your way through 162 games.
No, you cannot. And that's why, last year we saw a lot of different things where, Mickey Mouse awards or
60 games is a lot easier to get through 162, but it felt like they played 162 because it's not as if a larger sample size would have helped that Phillies team last year. Like that was not the case.
No, not at all. But like, you mentioned with their bullpen having over 7 ERA last year and still not being great this year. Like during the series, your pitching was outstanding. You mentioned the Nola 10 strikeouts.
Starting pitching.
Matt Moore shut us out. Zach Wheeler pitched incredible on Sunday against us. Like, you guys, you're starting pitching really well, but once the starters get taken out, I get like a sense of confidence. It's like, okay, Hector Neris is coming in.
Hector Neris is coming in, that there's going to be a ball hit on the infield that we haven't had a ball hit to third that's been messed up yet today. I'm sure that'll, like, anytime a ground ball is hit to first or third base, it's like, yeah, that's a coin flip, whether it actually gets fielded correctly or not. That can't happen in the major leagues. Like, no. And it's not as if the defense is better as you go around the field. You have, pretty old Andrew McCutchen standing out there in left. You have a middle infield of, Segura, Torres, which is basically what it's turned into. I believe the only player with a positive defensive run saved as of pretty recently on the Phillies was JT Realmuto. So if the ball's getting put in fair territory and it requires an average major league play to be made on it, or an above average major league play, you don't love the Phillies' chances on it. It's kind of ridiculous.
No, and that's something that I had to get used to the last few years, because the Mets were notoriously a not very good defensive team. This year they flipped it around. They're actually one of the better teams in the league. So sorry about that. I mean, that's
what's that like? I'm not exactly sure.
This is my first time experiencing it since probably 2006. So it's been great. Shout out Francisco Lindor and his addition. I know, offensively he's had his struggles, but defensively he's been a wizard. Luis Gourmet is one of the most underrated defensive players. Conforto and Pilar started the game on Sunday with 2 diving catches. Obviously, we lost. But defense matters. Like, do you think that's something that the Phillies front office is going to have to turn their attention to either at the deadline or in the off season? Because you saw the errors by Boehm and Hoskins, and it's really something it's an issue for you guys.
Yeah, I don't think you can afford to ignore it. I don't know what this team, I've been getting a lot of, or as I've been thinking here as we approach the trade deadline, rather, we're sitting here on June 28th recording this trade deadline towards the end of July. So we're about a month out. I don't think this team can be fixed in a trade deadline, but like, what do? You have a really depleted farm system. Dave Dombrowski was hired as the president of baseball operations. He's like the close guy, right? He's the guy you bring in when you're trying to win right now. And they haven't played well enough to basically prove that this team can be put in a position to win right now. So you have some people saying, oh, the Phillies should sell, except Dombrowski's not like the sell guy to try and rebuild this thing back up. So
he's notorious for getting rid of any prospects.
He's notorious for getting rid of any prospects you have, except the Phillies don't really have any. So I don't know what they do. I don't know what you can do. I would expect they're not going to make some sort of big splash, but they'll make some sort of move at the deadline. Like you said, yes, they should address at some point the defense, because I think it's pretty obvious that this is not sustainable, that if you expect to be a playoff team, you can't make yourself get into the playoffs with this. And by the way, I was starting to think, even if somehow this team did turn it around, which again, I see like a very, very small chance of, I'm fairly certain it won't happen. But even if they did get in the playoffs, like how mismatched or how overmatched they would look in a playoff game where bullpens become even more important and defense and not giving away outs becomes even more important. Like they would get run right off the field. This team isn't built for the playoffs. It's barely built for the regular season. So I don't know what you do at the trade deadline. They're in a very, and typically when you have, again, year 3 of the Bryce Harper contract and you just bring back JT Realmuto, that's not a timeline of a team looking to sell. But also, I don't know what you can buy that really fixes this team in the short term. And you don't want to give up. But I don't know if this is like as they say, a retooling, not a rebuilding year. Like you start thinking about next season, they're really stuck. And it's like the worst place to be in as a team, the worst place to be in as a fan. When your team's, we'll go to like the Sixers really quick. When the team was bad years and years, there's the horizon and the potential for them to get better down the line. Of course, they've had their problems since, but that is like the optimism that's there. There's nothing worse than having a lot of veterans on a team, being a team that's supposed to win right now, having nothing on the horizon and being extremely mediocre and blowing games left and right in just infuriating fashion. I really don't know what you do that makes any type of impact, but fortunately it's not my job to figure that out.
Fortunately, it's not, because that's a tall task. But like you said, like it's just the window doesn't seem like it's really there. Like you anticipated it being.
It was supposed to be open, and it's just not.
Correct.
And
correct.
I don't know.
You signed Bryce Harper to the huge contract many years, and you signed JT Realmuto to the 5-year deal after this past offseason. You've signed Wheeler the previous offseason. You obviously got Nola, who's still, he's entering his prime. And like you have veterans like Kutch, Segura, like you got guys, and Bohm's like someone who just came up, and Spencer Howard's supposed to be good. He hasn't shown that so far.
He can't go that deep into games. His velocity falls off. I mean, I do want to make it clear. Dombrowski was hired this past offseason, wasn't even given a full offseason to make something of this team. Now, I wasn't big fans of the Matt Moore and Chase Anderson acquisitions, but I don't want to pretend like this is lying on Dave Dombrowski's shoulders why they're in the position that they're in. This is a long-standing organizational issue.
Correct.
That he accepted a job with, and presumably in that job interview, they asked, what is your plan here to fix this? And they probably thought they were going to be better than they were. But it's just a really, really frustrating place to be in, because, their actions say one thing, but the results say another. And I don't know how you blend that. I don't know how you ultimately try and salvage the place you're in. It could just ultimately mean that this entire Phillies rebuild, or this attempt to rebuild over the last 10 years or so. I mean, they weren't really trying to rebuild, though. The whole thing is they held on to their prospects, or they held on to their players too long after that run of 07 to 11, 2012, 2013. They're still trying to win. And then they finally try and tear it down, and they have very little to show for that era as a result. And then you had years and years of losing. And finally, it's like, hey, Bryce Harper's here. We mean business to win right now. And that might just end up being a failure too. And we could be back to square one. And this is why this organization is the second longest playoff drought in all of Major League Baseball. And thank goodness for the Mariners, because otherwise they'd be first.
Correct. And we'll get into the Mariners in just a second. I want to ask you one more question about the Phillies, though. You see the San Francisco Giants have the best record in baseball. Obviously, their manager is Gabe Kapler, who's a few years removed from being in Citizen Bank Park as the Phillies manager. How much of this is, on Joe Girardi? How much of this do you think Gabe Kapler could have done differently? Maybe it could have vaulted them success, or do you think the change of scenery was necessary for him to, come into his own as a manager?
So I'm going to say a few things that I don't think are independently true of each other. Number one is, I believe Gabe Kapler is likely. Look, I'm not scrutinizing his moves as much in San Francisco as I was when he was with the Phillies. I'm not going to say he did everything correct. People still aren't off the fact that he pulled Aaron Nola after 68 pitches on opening day, his first game ever. People were ready to fire him then. But ultimately, those were much worse rosters that he had. And he managed basically two 500 teams. One was 81 and 81. One was 80 and 82. And that 81 and 81 season is the closest thing the Phillies have had to a winning season in nearly a decade.
And remind me if I'm wrong, but they were in first place for a lot of
They
that
were,
year.
and then they collapsed at the end of the year. And I chalked that up. People got mad at them or mad at him because the expectations got raised and they blew it late. Whereas I view it more as in totality of they were overachieving for however many months, and then the sample size caught up with them. I do believe he seems like a guy like I had heard the saying once that he was kind of like a square peg in a round hole here in Philadelphia. His forward thinking and his personality and his attitude probably fits better in San Francisco as a city in terms of what they're doing and everything. Now, I don't want to say that this is all the team's deficiencies and the team's success in both cases isn't all him. This Giants lineup, I think, is one of the most nutty stories in all of Major League Baseball. You're talking Buster Posey, Brandon Crawford, Brandon Belt, Evan Longoria, all guys who I don't want to call them has-beens, but like the primes of their careers, certainly offensively, were years and years ago. And they're like putting together ridiculous years now. Especially Crawford, like learning how to hit this well for the first time in his career at age 34. Buster Posey was the best catcher in baseball just like 10 years ago. And now he's just randomly doing that again. So I don't think that's something Gabe Kepler said or did. It's one of the weirdest. Evan Longoria, too, like just coming back, having this great year. I don't think that's Kepler, but I think what it is clearly showing is that Gabe Kepler was not the guy holding this team back, as many people, I think, was an easy fall guy because he was the biggest personality on the team.
Right.
He managed the first year of Bryce, but certainly the first year he was here, there was no one really worth watching on those teams. I mean, you had, again, Aaron Nola going out every fifth day, but the rosters were not nearly as good. And so we had to pull out all of the stops to try and win some of those games. And he got 500 seasons out of them. Fast forward to Joe Girardi, better roster overall last year, better overall roster this year. And we're basically seeing the same thing. He went 28 and 32, comes in this season riding below 500. I think Girardi's been wildly disappointing as Phillies manager. The other day, just in New York, he lets Zach Eflin bunt in the seventh inning, and then he immediately comes out when I think it was McNeil goes to pinch hit and Ranger Suarez comes in. So it oftentimes seems like Girardi's not thinking far ahead. He notoriously forgot how many mound visits he had used earlier this season. The team often seems wildly unprepared for games, like big games that they absolutely need to win, big series they need to win. And so I'm asking myself, well, if Joe Girardi is supposed to improve on these things, we had heard a lot that the team needed a culture change, a clubhouse change, and that would somehow improve this team, that the fundamentals would be reinstated in this organization and things like spring training. And there's basically been none of that. His bullpen management is oftentimes extremely, extremely questionable. He let Matt Moore hit the other day in the second game on Friday, let him go one more. Now, they ultimately ended up winning those games. But again, there's a number of times I'm just trying to
small stuff,
recount them in my head. And so it's like, if there's no actual improvement here, and if the team is better and you're getting a worse result, then they were basically sold a bag of goods. I mean, they were really hyping up how impactful Joe Girardi was. This was a guy who won one World Series in his career back in 2009 with like multiple All-Stars and Hall of Famers. It was ridiculously talented. And I don't know how hard it is to manage your late inning bullpen. Like, he can't figure out who the closer is. Well, the guy had Mariano Rivera. So I'm not trying to discount. I think managers are oftentimes overrated or underrated. I think people use two polarizing viewpoints when talking about them when the team's doing poorly. And this isn't any sport. Oh, it's on the manager. He did this, he did that, whatever. Okay, well, maybe the team stinks. Or sometimes people just try and discount, well, it's really easy to manage a baseball game. Well, I encourage you to go watch Joe Girardi manage a baseball game. The guy's been around baseball for how long and consistently has these blunders. Like, it's very, very questionable. But the overall point and the long-winded thing I'm trying to say here is that clearly Gabe Kepler was not the aspect of this equation that was holding this team back. Clearly, I would venture to say he would probably admit he's a better manager now. I'm sure he learned things with the Phillies that
Definitely.
when he went and interviewed with the Giants, like anyone in any industry, we're two young professionals here in the media industry, TV, radio, whatever the case might be. If you were to interview for a second job after having left to first because it didn't work out, you would know things from the first that you wouldn't do the second time around. You would know how to deal with people. He was a rookie manager at the time. So I'm not trying to discount that. I'm sure they're getting a new and better Gabe Kapler, and good for the Giants for giving him a chance, because clearly he has added some sort of value into that team, or he's bringing some sort of clubhouse culture that is working. Whatever they need him to be doing, that part of the equation is working. We'll see how the Giants do over the second half of the season, because when the NL West was discussed at the beginning of this year, it was the Padres and the Giants.
No
the Giants were not in that conversation, and they are very much a part of the conversation now. So that's one of the biggest storylines heading into the second half here that I think will be really interesting to see. But the overall point is that the Phillies issues went way, way beyond Gabe Kapler, and they're still existent today, because I think Joe Girardi is a very overrated manager. People in New York still speak of him incredibly highly. They can take him back for all I care.
The Mets wanted to hire, or at least
the Mets wanted him too. Yeah, I know. But people, I have relatives that are Yankee fans. Like, you like having Joe Girardi? I'm like, not really. The guy's he hasn't been that good. He's been incredibly mediocre, and he's now given a team that was not as good as the '09 Yankees, and he actually has to manage it and try and add value. And I haven't seen it at all. I think it's been wildly disappointing here now in a large sample size, 60 games last year, close to 3 months this year. I haven't seen the allure of Joe Girardi that I thought I was going to see. And I think Gabe Kapler now in San Francisco is proving that he's an even better manager now. He's a more experienced manager now, and that the Phillies' issues with whether it's prospect development or the talent on the field went far beyond him. And he was just a really, really small part of that.
Yes, he was. Hopefully, well, not hopefully for us, you guys turn around, but hopefully for your sanity, maybe. Maybe they'll do some things in the offseason. Maybe they'll turn around a little bit this year. Who knows? But the Phillies definitely have some work to do. But I want to go back to, we mentioned the Mariners for a second. Reliever Hector Santiago, Sunday, was the first pitcher to get docked for foreign substance use in a game. Umpires checked him, got some on his glove. They wrapped his glove up, sent it to, I'm presuming, the MLB offices in New York.
I would love to be in the room, by the way, when they're dissecting that glove. I'm picturing a science classroom, in high school, where they're really digging this thing apart, almost when you used to do those dissections of frogs and stuff like that. Are they running chemical tests on this? I suppose. I don't fully know what's going on in this room, but I would love to be a fly on the wall when these conversations are happening. Yeah.
Love to, especially just because and we'll get into this in a second. I personally don't know what Rob Manfred's doing in all of this, but what's kind of your take on the whole foreign substance crackdown?
Yeah, I think they've kind of been patching this together as they go here a little bit right now. A lot of people are annoyed that they're doing this mid-season. Look, I get it. If there's something wrong going on, and it's clear that there's some sort of cheating, or there's some sort of edge that pitchers are getting unfair, and we're hearing all about the lack of, and not hearing, we're seeing day in and day out the lack of offense that happens in the game and increased strikeouts. They're not going to wait until the offseason to try and crack down on something like that. If there were in a school zone, if people were speeding for the first half of the school year, and because they just weren't cracking down on it, and by the end of the month, they're now cracking down on it, someone might get pulled over and say, well, you weren't cracking down on this a week ago. It's does that mean we should not enforce it for the rest of the, that was a weird analogy, but I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
I got
you. Once you realize it, I don't think that's an excuse to just let it go for the rest of the season. Now, baseball is a little bit different. There were games played earlier this season where I think we now know, we don't have physical proof of it, but guys were very clearly using it. I don't think Garrett Cole gives a response to a question like that unless he has a history of using it. So
he was like a deer in headlights when he was.
We can assume that games in April and May, and going far before the season, guys were using substances that are prohibited by Major League Baseball. And we could go in a number of different directions here. We could say, well, should they be? That's debate number one. Number two, should they be enforcing this now? Because now games that count just as much in the standings, being played in June, July, August, and September, are basically under a different enforcement of rules. Though I do understand why they're starting to enforce the rules now, because you don't want to just let it slide because you were bad at enforcing a rule beforehand. Doesn't mean you should continue to be bad at it. Like, you fix it when you find it. But the whole procedure here of guys coming off the mound, it was actually quite comical. I was at the doubleheader the other day, and every time, especially a Mets pitcher would come off, and it was Taijuan Walker, I believe, in the first game, and he's coming off the mound, and the umpires go to check him. The entire crowd boos, which was like a very sarcastic boo. I had never been at a stadium where the umpires are getting booed for checking a guy's glove. But the procedure is a little weird. Like, you're doing it as he comes off the mound. So again, if they found it, no one had been caught yet at that point. But in the case of Santiago, like, the inning's already happened. What do you do? Like, okay, now we reverse back an inning and say that didn't count. I think the only way you could do this is have some sort of centralized rule to prevent what happened with the Phillies and the Nationals last week, where Max Scherzer and Joe Girardi are going at it. You say, we're going to check them either every inning, every 2 innings, every 3 innings, and we're going to do it before the inning, whatever the case is. So everyone's on the same page of when they're getting checked. Now, some might argue, well, if the guys know when they're getting checked, they might find ways around it. Short of checking the pitcher's glove and the catcher's glove like every 2 seconds, I don't know how you fully crack down on it. You're just trying to put some sort of enforcements in place. If you check them when they're coming out of the dugout or a bullpen guy comes in, I think that's all you can really do. I struggle with the aspect of, how much is too much involvement here, because I don't think you should just let loose. Like, they do need to do something to improve the offense. There's been discussions of things that might happen in the offseason for years now. Lower the mound. Would you ever move it back? Would you say you can and can't do certain things? And then you have Max Scherzer coming back with saying, hey, I'm just trying to get a grip. I was going to my hair for sweat and moisture with rosin because I can't grip the ball. And one time they were cracking down on it. I couldn't grip the ball and it went up near Alec Boehm's head. So I don't want pitchers to be throwing all over the place. I'm not a major league pitcher, so I don't fully understand the impact that something like Spider Tack has.
Right.
But clearly, if they were all using it, it was giving them some sort of competitive edge. So they need to, this is something that in the offseason, and this offseason for baseball as a whole is going to be interesting because we're headed for a potential labor dispute. But
correct.
Among the things that need to be discussed is an agreement of what is and isn't too much policing of this, what rules, what pitchers can and cannot use, how often are we going to check it? And let's end this rule that Rob Manfred basically came up with in the middle of the season just to alleviate some of the usage of it for the remainder of the year.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think it's 2 things. One, you had mentioned the fact that they did it in the middle of the season, which, I get too. But I also I don't know if you heard right after Tyler Glasnow partially tore his UCL, it was probably within a week or 2. I think it was within a week of them starting to crack down and them saying that they're going to enforce it at some point soon. And he had a press conference and said, listen, I wasn't using Spider Tack or anything like that, but sunscreen and rosin is something that pretty much every pitcher uses. It gives a little grip, but it doesn't really affect spin rate that much, or at least what he was saying. I'm not saying this. And I think he said the reason that he tore his UCL is because he was gripping the ball towards the top of his fingertips, and because he had enough stickiness to, be able to get it in there, he didn't have to push it all the way back in his hand. Because when you push it all the way back in your hand, it has more of effect on, your forearm, which leads to your UCL. So pitchers have had to grip the ball harder to throw it, which has caused UCL problems because the muscles there aren't good. That's number 1. Number 2, I just don't love how they're almost undressing players after they come off the mound.
This has become a little bit of a thing too. Like,
yeah.
Max Scherzer starts,
he was going crazy the other day.
He was going crazy, and then Sergio Romo did the same thing. It looked like he was ready to go, drop his pants, like he's headed to the bathroom or something. Yeah, you're checking belts because guys will get creative where they hide this kind of stuff. If Hector Santiago, by the way, was really using Spider Tack or some other illegal substance, I mean, I don't know if he thought he was going to get away with it or they just wouldn't check him. I would want to know
what his thought process.
What his thought process was. Scherzer saying post game, and he's right. He's like, I'd have to be an absolute fool to try it now. So I don't know if this is going to be a thing where they check it for a few weeks and it dies down. Everyone's antennas are up right now.
Yes.
I don't know if this maintains over the course of a season. I don't know what they do, but they're kind of piecing it together as they go along. And
it's just kind of embarrassing. Tyler Meagle for the Mets, he made his debut this past week. pitched 4 1/3 innings, scoreless ball to that point. He ended up, 2 runs were on base that were accounted for. Comes off the mound, he's getting a standing ovation. He just made his major league debut, pitched 4 1/3 shutout innings. And then the umpires have to check him for foreign substance.
Well, that's why I think, shouldn't you check him before he goes out for the inning?
Exactly. And there was a pitcher for the Orioles who had just gotten caught up, Mickey Janis, who's a knuckleballer. The point of being a knuckleballer is to have absolutely no spin on the ball. And that's why someone uses spider tack or, other substances of choice. And they check him. It's like, I get it.
So what are you going to do? Like, okay, guy throws knuckleball, so we can assume he's not using it. David Hale's coming off the mound for the David Hale's coming off the mound for the Phillies. He's got an ERA that feels like it's north of 100. If he's using it, I imagine how bad it would be if he wasn't using it. So
it's a slippery slope.
It's a slippery slope. So yeah, people have sarcastically said if your ERA is that high, you shouldn't get checked anyway. It's not really doing much. I don't know what you do. You have to have some uniform rule. It's not personal. It's like getting checked for an ID when you enter a bar and you're 35 and you're like, you really think I could be younger than 21? Like, how flattering, or like, how much of a moron are you? And the bouncer's like, it's not you. I just have to check everyone. It's like, just make this process fast. But you also don't check IDs when you're leaving the bar. You check it on the way in. So how about check it when they're entering? I don't know.
It just, like we both just said, it's a slippery slope. I don't know how they're going to address it in the offseason, but that's one of the issues that they are going to have to, because I think what's going on right now isn't working. Like, I think, yes, it's working. The fact that people aren't using them as much. Obviously, Hector Santiago was the first to get caught, and I think it's scaring a lot of people. You've seen Garrett Cole be a little bit more not a Cy Young candidate, even though he still pitched relatively well. But, it's just, they're going to have to figure out something where it's, they're not checking all the time, or they're not undressing players almost in the middle of the field. Like, maybe managers should be more diligent in having umpires check if they think something's going up, if they see a fastball spinning like it shouldn't.
Well, that's the other thing, is Joe Girardi apparently had reason to ask, and so they go out and check Scherzer again. I feel like I would take any managerial discretion out of this, because you're just going to add more time to the game. The game's already slow enough. Just make it an umpire uniform thing. Every inning you go out there, you're getting checked. If we don't catch you in that process, then go for it. Is honestly what I'd say. I don't know what more you can do. I don't want managers saying, hey, go check him for that. Umpires should turn around and be like, we checked him before the inning. It was fine. Deal with it. And we're doing the same thing for your guy too. So if they can get away with it there, so can your pitcher. Again, I don't know what more you can do, because if a manager's just consistently asking, hey, I think he's using it, then you're just headed down a really, like you said, a slippery slope is the way to look at it.
Yeah, it's a tough thing that they're going to have to figure out this offseason. Real quick before we go, though, one last thing. All-Star Game's coming up in a few weeks here. One of the favorite times of the year for all MLB fans. Yeah. Each team is guaranteed an All-Star. Obviously, some teams will have more that make it. Who do you think on your Phillies squad is going to be representing the city of Philadelphia in Colorado?
Well, I think Zach Wheeler is the easy pick. Guy's having a ridiculous season. Gene Segura hasn't been able to stay on the field enough this season. Probably, like, he's had a couple of injuries, and so I don't know how that might hurt him in getting there. But when he plays, he's played, I think, deserving of an All-Star. The Phillies haven't had multiple All-Stars, I think, in at least 8 years. I'd have to go back and see what. I mean, it's been a while since they've had more than one. I think Zach Wheeler is the easy pick. I can also announce that as of the last 24 hours, this is you're getting some inside information here. I will be in the stands at Coors Field out in Colorado for both the Home Run Derby and the All-Star Game, cheering on likely only Zach Wheeler, but there's a chance. Phillies, Bryce Harper's one of the finalists for the All-Star vote here, so maybe he gets himself in. There's a little bit of a name value and popularity in that too. There was no All-Star Game last year. He didn't make it in 2019, so it would be nice to see Bryce represent the Phillies in an All-Star Game in a Phillies uniform. Now, one thing I don't like is that they're not using the All-Star. Like, they made separate All-Star jerseys for the game this year.
I hate them.
So two things here. Number one, no one likes the jerseys, which is problem number one.
The hats are cool, I think.
Yeah, fine. Okay. Number two, the jerseys stink. Number two, the coolest thing about the MLB All-Star Game was that they all wore their own jerseys. So I don't understand why they got rid of that tradition. I thought that was pretty cool. But yes, I will be in Coors Field. I think Zach Wheeler is almost like a lock for an All-Star at this point. like I think said, Segura, when he's on the field, has played well enough. Bryce Harper might get himself in with a vote here. So those are the guys in legitimate contention. No one else has been, certainly no one in the bullpen is good enough. And there's not any of the other position players that have been good enough either. Sometimes you can get in just because you're a catcher and there aren't a ton of good catchers. Now Buster Posey's should absolutely start.
He's gonna start.
I'm trying to think who the other catchers would be. It's not like Realmuto is having some stellar year that would say, hey, he should be an all-star, but oftentimes there are catchers who have lackluster offensive seasons that still get themselves in just because the catcher pool isn't that deep. So
that would take a look at NL catchers. I mean, Wilson Contreras, maybe.
I'm thinking it's going to be, to answer your question, the one required guy is going to be Wheeler. Right. And then you're looking at the only other guys who I would say have any shot would be Segura because he's played well when he's played. Harper largely because of his name. Not that he's having a bad season.
He's having an okay year.
He's having, when you get paid that much, the levels increase. And he's obviously dealt with a lot of injuries here as well. He has the highest OPS on the team, but there are other outfielders that are just having ridiculous seasons in the National League that are probably more deserving than him. And Realmuto, just what do they carry? They go 3 catchers in the All-Star team?
I think so.
So maybe he gets like the 3rd spot, though I feel like there are other catchers that are better than him. I'd have to start listing them, as you said. Posey should definitely start for the National League. But so Wheeler is the guy who I'm putting my money on to get here because he's, I know it pains you as a former Met, but he's been absolutely ridiculous and been the ace of the Philly staff here this season not in the absence of, but Aaron Nola not having his best stuff this year. There used to be a large debate as to whether he's an ace or not. That has gone away for a while. And Zach Wheeler has really stepped up big and been far better than I think anyone, even his strongest believers, could have imagined here, basically for the 2nd year in a row.
It's been incredible to see, especially like you mentioned, he's a former Met. I'm happy for him. I'm upset he went to another team, but that's the Mets former management's fault for not offering him a contract at all. Imagine, but we traded for Stroman. We signed Taijuan Walker. Obviously, we have another guy who I'll mention in a second. But yeah, I mean, for the Mets All-Stars, Edwin Diaz, I think, can get in. I think he's having a good year, though he's been a little shaky in non-save situations, but he's been absolutely dominant in save situations. Stroman, I think, could get in if he's healthy. Taijuan Walker, same. And we might have another pitcher who's pretty good there. I believe he goes by Jacob deGrom.
Yeah, he's going to be starting for the National League. I can
if he pitches.
If he pitches, and assuming he doesn't re-aggravate anything or he's willing to do it, he is the right of first refusal.
Yes,
to be the starter in the National League. Now, do we have an all New York starting pitching matchup? Do you expect to see Garrett Cole on the other side?
He very well could. I don't know if he's been the absolute best pitcher in the AL. We could see a Shane Bieber. We could see, there's a lot of guys we could go through. I'm kind of blanking a little bit right now. We definitely could see an all New York matchup. And we almost could see an all New York matchup. I believe it's this week or next week, but deGrom's supposed to pitch one day before Garrett Cole. So,
come on.
Wow, I think they're going to be playing the Pirates, I want to say, and then the next day they're facing the Yankees and Garrett Cole. So, I'm a little bit disappointed that Luis Rojas isn't pushing him back. But
because you wouldn't even really lose. This is what date that they're playing the Yankees?
This weekend. I had this up. No, it's not this weekend. I'm going to pull it up right now just because I was blanking on it.
Sometimes you can backtrack, work backwards from the All-Star game to get them the most starts.
Oh no, it's okay. It is this weekend. I was wrong. Yeah. So we're
July 2nd, 3rd, and 4th.
Yes. So we're playing the Braves on Thursday, and I believe deGrom's starting that game.
Well, I guess you can it's an NL East game. The game is more important.
It definitely is. And the Braves are on the rise too. So,
but the point is, he's starting on Thursday, which means he could go again on Monday, which means he could go again on Friday. So he's got 3 starts left before the All-Star break.
Yes, he has 3 starts.
You're telling me.
Yes.
Whereas if they pushed him back to Friday, he would still have 3 starts before the All-Star break. But then you wouldn't have him against the Braves, who, look, objectively, it's a more important game. As baseball fans, it would be awesome to see deGrom Cole. For fans, an all New York matchup would be
Oh
awesome
my
to
God,
see
yeah.
that. But for the Mets actually trying to make the playoffs, it's objectively more important to beat the
Yes.
Atlanta Braves than the New York Yankees.
Though
So
actually, I think
I won't kill him for that.
I think he might be. It actually might be different. I think he might have pitched. I mean, Cole might be pitching Sunday on July 4th against
So then
the
you're really
Mets.
pushing him back and you're losing a DeGrom start. So they definitely can't do that.
Yeah, and then I think he'd be pitching Monday against the Brewers, who are obviously leading the NL Central. But I want to see Cole versus DeGrom, man. That would be so cool.
So if they moved,
especially in
Cole,
Yankee Stadium.
If they moved Cole or they moved DeGrom rather up a day, so he just pitched against the Phillies. So
on Saturday.
So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4. So he's going to be on 5 days rest. The Mets have an off day here this week.
Yes.
Okay, so that's why he's getting the extra rest day.
I think, yeah. So, well, no, we're playing the Nationals. We're obviously recording this on Monday. We're playing the Nationals today, makeup game. Jared Eichhoff starting that. So then we're playing the Braves Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So we've had our off days taken away here a little bit.
Well, the Mets still have to make up games for all those games they missed at the beginning of the year.
Yes, we missed an insane amount of games. Yeah, snow out in Colorado.
Snow outs in Colorado because that happens in April.
Yes.
Hoping for sunny skies here in July in Colorado.
That's awesome. You get to go, by the way. Before we go,
I've never been. I've been to. This will be my, I believe, 10th lifetime baseball stadium. I'm excited for that. I've been to the Veteran Stadium, Citizens Bank Park in Philly, Citi Field a couple of times, the new Yankee Stadium, never the old, Fenway, Camden Yards, Nats Park, PNC Park in Pittsburgh, and it's Oracle Park in San Francisco was AT&T at the time. This will be my second ever outside of the Eastern time zone. I know you got to go to Wrigley. I believe it was earlier this year.
I did. Yes.
Very cool. That's phenomenal. On the bucket. That's on the bucket list. But I've never been to a stadium for an All-Star game. I'll be there for the Home Run Derby and the All-Star game. So it won't be maybe the feel of like a usual Rockies home game, but very happy to cross this off the list. And, the All-Star game is 5 years from now in Philly. So who knows where I'll be at in life at that point, but have that one circled on the calendar in the year 2026 for America's 250th birthday. But yeah, we're a little bit of a family vacation here. My mom especially is a big outdoorsy person, has always wanted to go to Colorado, visit the Rocky Mountains. I'm like, hey, All-Star game coming up in July. So we're both getting something out of it. And I'll enjoy that part of it too.
Yeah, of course.
But the baseball part is something that I'm really looking forward to. And I'm looking forward to the inning that hopefully Zach Wheeler gets to pitch in that game.
Yes, definitely. It's going to be exciting. Your first ever All-Star game as a fan. And I'm very happy you get to go. So that's going to be awesome. Buzz, thank you so much.
Of course. Happy to make my debut. I hope it was this is episode 14, you said?
14, correct.
Okay. How often do we record? This is once a week?
It's weekly, yeah.
Okay, once a week.
And we took a couple of weeks off when I was home last. So
sure. Okay.
Yeah. So appreciate you.
Well, we didn't even get to that. I'm sure the people want to hear. So we're now tied 1-1 in our.
I didn't know if you wanted to mention it.
No, we can absolutely mention. We can mention. We are 1-1 in our 1-1 series, our 1-on-1 series. You're of course in Michigan these days. I'm still in the Philly area. We played back pre-COVID at Temple indoors.
February of 2020. We played at McGonigal Pearson McGonigal.
But then we played again on Memorial Day this year, and you got the better end of me that time. So now we're tied 1-1, and there's a highly anticipated game 3 of the series at some point. Who knows when? I'm also calling for a much better at pool basketball, and I found out that a few mutual friends of ours have a pool basketball setup.
Yes, they do. I know a few people.
So we're gonna have to do that at some point. I haven't played that in a while.
Me neither.
But I'm much better in the water than out. My lack of mobility gets a little neutralized in the water, and I'm just dominant in the post. You should see it. I
am a liability in the post in the water. I will say that.
So I'll route you.
You will probably route me. And obviously we know my jump shot's not the best. So that's the only thing I really have going for me in the pool. So yeah, you might get the better end of me on that one, but I'm hoping for game 3. We'll have to pick a
game 3 will happen at some point.
Yes. Yeah. Will happen at some point. Hopefully, I think late summer can definitely be feasible, but we'll plan that.
Don't worry. I haven't been training or anything. The first time I shot around since then was I went in my driveway the other day, and granted, a little bit deflated ball. My rim, via Tom Brady. the rim is a little forgiving, and I walked off approximately 15 feet. But I
Okay.
did the Ben Simmons free throw shooting challenge. I didn't have the space on my phone to record it, so I'm going to have to get someone else to record it as a witness.
I definitely know
But
a guy who would be interested in that.
but so I do too. Ben Simmons, I believe, was 25 for 62 from the foul line in the playoffs. I did it on free throws. I either shoot, it's either like 80% or 20%. I either go on an unreal heater or just cannot make anything. 49 of 62
All
from the
right.
foul line. From the foul line. So all I'm saying is,
Sixers, if you need a guy.
If you need a guy to shoot free throws late in games, sometimes it'll be really, really bad. But if you're choosing between me or Ben Simmons, number one pick in the draft, max contract player, you can make the argument for me at the foul line. So I'm not going to get too far into the Sixers and my frustrations with them, but that was the first time I've shot since, and I just wanted to.
I have not shot since, so
I just wanted to flex a little bit that not having shot free throws in a while. I shot 10 warm-ups beforehand and then counted from there 62, and I was just straight money.
All right. Yeah. Well, I mean, hopefully Daryl Morey calls your name soon.
Oh, absolutely. I'm hoping to get the tryout and be ready for next season.
Exactly. Right. And looking forward to our third game as well. And
for sure,
looking forward to everyone hearing this. So, thank you for coming on. Yes. Love to have you on. You are more than welcome on anytime.
Sounds good.
Shout out to everybody tuning in and following me as always. Love y'all for that. Thank you for all the support. And we will see you guys next time. Until then.